damn bent. Dude, he looks like he belongs in coastal crypto, dude. He's the third member of Coastal.
The vast majority that are actually here know better, but this PSA is not for those of you who actually know. Instead, it's for the ones who actually don't. So picture this. You're having a conversation with ChatGPT about maybe your medical symptoms. Maybe you're discussing your divorce strategy, or maybe you're talking about a draft. Here's one thing that you actually need to know as of May 13th, 2025. Every single word that you actually type is now permanently stored on OpenAI servers by a federal court order. And we're not just talking about this being some kind of...
That's interesting, that's by a federal court order. Like, I know that Discord, for example, has it all stored and replicated to the point to where you're never getting rid of anything you say on Discord. You're never getting rid of it, right?
Temporary measure or half measure, anything like that. Or it's not like there's anonymized data or something that they're storing. It's like all the data, even if you delete it, is still there. Now, obviously, I know many of you already see AIs like this as a severe threat vector, and therefore tell them nothing, and good for you. Even if you do practice good security, does your family, right? Do your friends? This is the actual value proposition for those of you who are actually on point OPSEC-wise. A federal judge just turned the world's most popular AI assistant into a mandatory surveillance system. And this is thanks to the New York Times, a newspaper that's been hemorrhaging subscribers faster than a severed artery. And as a result, they feel that the world needs to conform to them and have, as a result, decided to throw a legal tantrum about their articles being used to train an AI. Judge Ona Wang ordered that OpenAI must preserve all output log data, so those conversations and the chats that you think you deleted, they aren't deleted. Every kind of like embarrassing question you thought disappeared when you actually hit the delete button is still very much there and will stay there. The company that built its reputation on we don't store your data, to some extent, is now legally required to become the NSA's wet dream. Basically, OpenAI processed millions of conversations on a daily basis, as far as we know. And we're talking about terabytes of data that include things like medical queries from desperate patients, legal strategies from people who can't actually afford lawyers, business secrets from entrepreneurs, personal confessions from people seeking help, political dissident information from people living under authoritarian regimes. Some people use it as a talk therapist as well. All of this data now sits in servers that will be breached at some point. The ivory tower judge that's...
Well, and that's the biggest argument against KYC, right? That we've talked about 100,000 times at this point. It goes back to what I said about, like, you know, just because the administration isn't going to use Palantir poorly now doesn't mean that the next won't, right? And just because the company doesn't have ill intentions doesn't mean that somebody that's capable of hacking that company doesn't have ill intentions, you know? So you really, like, KYC at the end of the day, you know, it gets sold as this protection of individuals, when in reality, KYC is the exact opposite of protection of individuals. It's really crazy to me that we also live in a time where a ton of different KOLs promote this type of practice, and it gets sold on this idea of being safer for you, when in reality it's more dangerous across the board, because it's almost 100% certainty that that data will get compromised by a bad actor at some point in time, even if the company that's holding the data isn't a bad actor.
Sits in Manhattan, doesn't understand, doesn't care, and probably doesn't have any clue as to what this order actually entails. She fails to actually grasp that at some point, almost every database becomes a target. Every retained byte is a liability. The OPM hack exposed 22 million federal employees. Equifax leaked like 140 million Americans' financial data, and those were organizations that were actually trying to secure their systems. Now, the Times couldn't innovate their way out of a wet paper bag, so basically they're using court.
I like his Monero sticker, by the way, over here. I just noticed it. The state fears this.
To shake down the companies that do innovate. And if it wasn't bad enough that anytime you visit their site, they try to act like it's 1930 and that they're still the gatekeepers of knowledge via a paywall that can be simply killed by disabling JavaScript, by the way. But and I'm referencing the New York Times here, not ChatGPT. Their business model collapsed because people realized that paying $20 a month for propaganda just wasn't worth it. And as a result, their solution was to sue the future. Like,
is that the new Cubes OS? It is. That is the new Cubes OS. Dude, I like this guy. Definitely going to hit that sub over here. He's got a Monero sticker and a Cubes OS sticker, like right there. And I've done guides with Cubes OS on this channel. I love Cubes, man.
The future. Like, and they're claiming OpenAI stole their articles, and the same articles that they blasted across the internet for free if you disable JavaScript. It's the same content that they stuff with tracking cookies and sell data to data brokers, but when an AI reads it to learn things like language patterns, all of a sudden it's theft. Dying institutions using federal force to extract rent from innovation is exactly what's happening here. They can call it copyright protection if they want. However, it's obviously more like new age regulatory capture. Now, think about...
Well, and that whole... I don't know if you guys watched that podcast with Theo Vaughn and the vice president, but it was extremely disconcerting when he shrugged off the section of the Big Beautiful Bill regarding AI that effectively said, states will not be allowed to regulate. And that is, especially coming from a so-called conservative Republican president, is probably even more scary than it coming from a Democrat, because at least if it comes from a Democrat, it's like, okay, well, the Republicans will overturn it, but because they believe in, states' rights and sovereignty. But at this point, it's just not even the case. And because it's related to AI, it makes it that much scarier, right?
About this.
Like, I think the current administration's approach to AI has really disappointed me and really put me against the current administration in a lot of ways, right? And I'm obviously probably there's a little bit of fear mongering that goes into that, etc. But just because I can tell that their principles are misaligned from the very get-go, it brings into question everything else that's going on.
So for a minute, that court that
but saying Trump has always been a moderate, that's fine, Ramon, except for the fact that we have, a character like JD Vance, who's not supposed to be necessarily that moderate, right? Saying these things about basically not allowing states to regulate crypto. I mean, like, at the end of the day, like, they want to say, like, it's funny depending on, like, and both parties do it, right? It's frustrating, but depending on like what the state's doing, they just shift their position.
I talked about doesn't specify who gets access to this data. It just says preserve it for potential use in litigation. I've dealt with this kind of vague language before, and I'll tell you like what this actually means in practice. Discovery requests, subpoenas, things like national security letters. Every 3-letter agency basically just got a golden ticket to the most intimate conversations of millions of people who, a lot of them, thought that their conversations were going to be private. Again, we could say, well, they're stupid for trusting a company. That's bad OPSEC. I'm not going to disagree on any of those points. But again, there are a ton of people who are affected who don't even know what OPSEC is. And that's kind of the point of this, is to bring this to light and hopefully educate those people on what OPSEC actually is. The FBI doesn't need to hack OpenAI anymore if they wanted to get something, nor do intelligence agencies. They just need to file a request with the Southern District of New York, and they'll get it.
I mean, Ozzy, you're not wrong. JD Vance just says whatever Peter Thiel tells him to say. And that is, at the end of the day, I mean, we can say that, you know, the money didn't influence it or whatever, but that feels so disingenuous and like just a complete, like, disregard of reality that I don't know that you can, right?
Everything that they wanted. So think about like every activist who used ChatGPT, for example, to organize, or every journalist who checked sources. By default now, the data is cataloged, searchable, and ready for legal exploitation. So hopefully you're not deemed an enemy of the state anytime soon. So from an OPSEC perspective, OpenAI just became absolutely radioactive. And that's because every query creates a permanent piece of evidence that's stored for forever. Deletion is absolutely meaningless because the data persists even after deletion. Your conversations are one subpoena away from becoming public record. OpenAI employees now have access to data that they were never actually supposed to see originally. The attack surface just expanded exponentially. And in response, OpenAI, to their credit...
And then they're going to plug directly into your head and use AI to determine if you're going to do something wrong in the future.
I said that they're concerned about privacy implications. They know this is an absolute disaster. And to their credit, they're also filing an appeal, which is not cheap. So that's awesome that they're actually doing that. That could take years, though. Federal appeals are not known for being things that get resolved very quickly. But a federal judge said jump, so they're inclined to basically ask how high because they have to. Now, this is exactly why things...
I do always wonder, like, how that works with intrusive thoughts. Like, I listen to Asmongold a lot, and one of the things, like, he was talking about, like, how he's very open about his intrusive thoughts. And he's like, yeah, I've thought about killing people that have made me mad or whatnot. And the fact is like a lot of people have thoughts like that. And if those thoughts get completely revealed by whether it's Neuralink or AI, etc., like what kind of forgiveness do we have to get to? Like we have to get to like Christ level forgiveness to even function within society. And as we know, like the reason we have the character of Christ is because as humans, we're not even capable of that. So we're getting to a really weird time where, you know, and it already is by and large this way. I'm guilty of it. People I communicate with on Twitter are guilty of it. You know, we all, you know, take the overload of information of people's personal lives and then utilize that to attack them over any small disagreements that we may or may not have, right? Like we already have this problem, and like all of these tools and the advancement of technology and AI in particular and all of this stuff seems to be pushing us in the direction of only making these things worse.
Things like decentralized systems, local AI models, and owning your compute actually matters. Every centralized system becomes a control point for the...
Thanks, Mushrooms. Good to hear from you. Thanks for chatting today.
the overall system. Every convenience service becomes a surveillance node at some point. The solution isn't to beg OpenAI to protect your privacy or to trust VPNs, as I've seen a lot of people advocate for, which is nuts to me, but that's a whole different story. The solution isn't to trust the courts to be reasonable, because they won't be. The solution is to build systems.
On the case of VPNs, there's obviously within cryptocurrency, from a non-KYC exchange perspective, there are uses for VPNs. Accessing content that is region locked are excuses for VPNs. But the primary use for a VPN, honestly, is to connect to a local network remotely. And that really should be the end of it. As far as thinking that you turn on a VPN and you can't be traced, just to his point, and I'm sure he's covered all this before, right? If you think you're going to turn on a VPN and just not be tracked, that's false, right?
That can't be subpoenaed or are extremely difficult to be subpoenaed, that run local models and use encrypted channels that practice proper OPSEC or operational security, making their core orders irrelevant through technology is, in my opinion, the best way to move forward with stuff like this. This order isn't going to just magically disappear. The Times smells money.
Well, and like a public VPN, I should also state, like if you're using Nord or something, at the end of the day, governments can put enough pressure on a company like that.
And the feds smell data. And OpenAI is just kind of caught in between. And all its customers are under them. So either way, it's a really bad position to be in. It's a matter of when, not if, this database actually gets leaked at some point. It'll make previous breaches look like practice runs. Like I said, there's going to be all kinds of data that's actually in these when it does happen, from business intelligence to legal strategies and all that kind of stuff we talked about before. And all tied to email addresses, IP addresses, and usage patterns, never mind the passwords and API keys, everything else that would be there. It would just be an absolute gold mine to get your hands on. And the identity theft potential just alone is absolutely catastrophic.
Well, and then that's where it gets scarier, right? Is there will be a breach to a certain extent like that, and then they will utilize the fear of identity theft to then basically push along a centralized database of all of the citizens within each given region to help prevent that, right? And probably something that will be verified and validated by some AI system within itself too, which is crazy. But that's how that will get approached at the end of the day.
Now, I know a ton of my subscribers are smart enough to have avoided putting their personal info into models like this, because many of you are extremely sharp when it comes to OPSEC, PERSEC, and InfoSec. However, you guys are all the minority. And I know that. Millions of people opened up to AI because they thought it was safe. They asked questions they never asked another human being. They explored ideas that they'd never speak out loud. And that trust is now weaponized against them, all thanks to a dying newspaper and an out-of-touch federal judge. So don't use ChatGPT for anything that you wouldn't want read out loud in a federal court, because that's exactly where this might end up. The New York Times just proved that obsolete institutions will use state violence to try and...
I don't think salt mines are coming. I don't know if... I think physical work goes away. It's more going to be the prison... is going to be the fact that you have no purpose. Right? Like, we got Musk coming out with the robots. That's going to take care of most of the manual labor stuff. As far as the IT world goes, coding, all that stuff will go away. Machinery is going to take over a lot of that stuff. Eventually, they'll have all the self-driving cars out, and it'll be illegal to drive a car yourself. What's going to be taken away and make us slaves is the fact that we'll no longer, as a human being, have a purpose or a drive to accomplish anything. It's like the same reason people get disappointed with playing chess now, and like it doesn't mean as much, is because the fact is there's this psychological thing of like, we know a computer can do it better, right?
Protect their failed business models, and OpenAI just proved that no corporate promise of privacy actually survives contact with federal judges. And this is why you need to depend on yourself and yourself only. If you're thinking right now that you've already disclosed a ton, so who cares? My advice would be, don't make it worse. Get rid of your OpenAI account and invest in a decent...
AI very often just makes up convincing sounding fictional crap. I mean, the most annoying content is somebody on TikTok being like, hey, AI, and then asking it like it's some great philosophical question and it has the answer to, and it's like...
GPU. And run a local model if you really need to use...
Sounds like the cat's here.
AI.
Hey, Victor. Let the kitty in. Oh, is the kitty over there? You're such a loud kitty.
Learn about how to set up custom knowledge bases and implement RAG systems and all that kind of stuff. But get out of the surveillance state ecosystem now while your exposure might be less. Like if you spend years inside these ecosystems, you just get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and the dependency will get greater and greater and greater and greater. That's what they want. I hope you choose not to do that and choose to invest in yourself. Controlling your data is always better than allowing someone else to control your data. So in any case, I really hope to see what you guys think about this. What are your ideas on it? Do you think you'll be able to convince family members who have adopted the use of AI models like this?
Like, you won't even be able to convince coworkers not to use AI models like this, right? At the end of the day, I dropped the video link in chat. This is a good video by Sam Bent. Make sure you go sub and all that to him. Let me close this. Boom.
To cut back or cut out or shift over to a different modality that allows them to perhaps still utilize AI, but in a different way or in a safe way.
But we've heard this with every piece of technology from guys like this since the beginning of time, right? And like, case in point, Discord's a great, and I even have Discord right here, right? Discord's a great example where like the convenience of it trumps the encryption of, say, TeamSpeak and the self-hosting capability, and everybody uses it. Therefore, if you don't use it, you're almost like you're basically at a disadvantage, right? Because if you don't use it, you don't have access to the same amount of information as the person next to you. And because the masses move towards that convenience, and because of the economical disadvantage of not utilizing services like this, people will just continue to use it. And you can have people like me and people like Sam here talking and making people aware of it. But at the end of the day, the fact is we still just keep going, running head first towards the cliff, right? Like lemmings. And I don't see it slowing down at all.
Okay. What are some of the methodologies that you use to stay safe with things like local models and stuff like that? I'd love to hear about all that kind of stuff in the comments if you guys are up for it. In any case, thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.
Cool. Great video. Yeah, make sure you guys go like it. That was cool. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Crypto Mining Show. If you would like to see more from this particular episode, take a look up here. Don't forget to also subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support me directly, you can go to sonofatech.locals.com and become a member. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next Tuesday.